Stefan is an obscure, easily missed character in both Fire Emblem titles he appears in. The vast majority of players would have no idea he exists were it not for online guides. That's a shame, as Stefan stands as one of the best written characters in the series. Part of what makes him so enjoyable and fascinating is just how subdued his entire existence is. Not only is he a unit few would ever recruit, he has very little dialogue across both games, but it's what they make of that dialogue that gives him value. Every tiny scrap afforded to this character pulls double duty in fleshing out both Stefan himself and his place in the world. With just 2 supports and a base conversation, you learn an unbelievable amount about Tellius' world and its history, all while having well-written prose that makes the interactions fun to read. I think he makes for a genuinely interesting case study in how you don't need much dialogue to write a deep character. Before I get started though, I'll ask that you like, comment, and subscribe. It helps a lot and I really appreciate it. I'm well on my way to 1 million subscribers, and while I think I can hit it before the end of the year, I'll need your help. Stefan debuts in a chapter that leans heavily on the fraught relationship between Beork and Laguz. In Chapter 15, The Feral Frontier, Ike's company is given a mission by Benyon to subdue a group of brigands. The brigands in question are the Laguz Emancipation Army. I don't believe Stefan's placement in this chapter is completely incidental. The chapter itself thematically primes the player to think about cross-cultural tensions within Tellius, which is precisely where Stefan sits. You don't learn this yet, but I think I probably should just go over it for context, but Stefan is a branded, which means he's the child of Beork and Laguz, and the branded are not exactly looked kindly upon by either faction. Stefan has one of the most esoteric recruitments in the series. Off the top of my head, Karl is the only one who's more obscure, and Latina if you want to count the Kaga Saga. He can only be recruited by positioning either Leth or Mordecai on a specific tile off in the corner of the map. I think the way Stefan is encountered can be said to be a mirror to his existence within Tellius. He doesn't come in with any kind of bravado, rather he appears in an event you can, and very likely will, miss, under conditions that you have no reason to expect. No other character is recruited this way, and there is nothing hinting towards it. That scarcity and difficulty of access may mimic his social status in the world. While a mechanical oddity, I think Stefan's recruitment also functions as a piece of foreshadowing. While the literal narrative of this chapter highlights the plight of the Laguz within Benyon, the recruitment of Stefan highlights that of the branded. Now, should anyone else step on this random, out-of-the-way tile, he presents nothing but an item and vanishes. Because this whole thing isn't esoteric enough, he also has unique dialogue with Soren. He still doesn't get recruited here, of course. Going back to what I said about his recruitment conditions being a metaphor for his place in the world, maybe him only being recruited by Laguz references the Laguz's ability to sense branded? This lore detail isn't really gone into until Radiant Dawn, but with the amount of foreshadowing already in Path of Radiance, it wouldn't be too much of a surprise. In the next chapter, Stefan will give Ike an occult scroll. This is an incredibly limited item, which grants a unit their class's mastery skill. I think this mainly just adds to the mystique around him. Not only was he hiding in the middle of the desert for no apparent reason, he also just so happens to have a super valuable item on him. I do like the detail of Stefan wanting to teach Ike swordplay. It paints him as an authority figure, which I think makes sense since Stefan obviously knows way more about the world than Ike does. As if this character wasn't esoteric enough, Stefan strangely has unique battle dialogue with Homasa, a swordmaster boss in Chapter 19. The two briefly talk about swordplay before fighting. Homasa also has unique interactions with Ike and Zyhark where they essentially talk about the same thing. Listen, as much as I like trying to find some meaning in random dialogue like this, I'm at a loss for words on this one. I thought initially that maybe it was a joke because they look similar, but that wouldn't explain him having dialogue with Zyhark too. Just another of Intelligent Systems' little tricks, I guess. That's about all the dialogue he has in the main story of FE9, leaving us with his supports. However, he only has 2 in the entire game. This isn't quite the lowest amount in FE9, but it's not that far off. This is remedied by the fact that these are the 2 best supports in the entire series. I'll first go into his support with Mordecai. The C support is a direct follow-up to his recruitment conversation, where he said he wanted to learn more about Gallia. Mordecai tells him that it's a good country, and asks Stefan in kind what he thinks of Benyon. He says that he detests it. Mordecai is confused as to what this means, but instead of explaining himself, Stefan just says that ignorance must be bliss before departing. For as short as it is, I think there's some really interesting subtext to this support. Stefan outwardly expresses his dislike for Benyon, while also implicitly expressing the same for Gallia. When Mordecai says that he likes Gallia, Stefan's response being, "It is, huh?" kind of comes across as sarcastic to me, or like he's conveying disbelief. I know this is probably just hindsight and that most people wouldn't pick up on it the first time reading it, but given what we know of how the branded are treated by both Laguz and Beork, it makes sense that he would be suspicious of Gallia. There's a lot left unsaid, but I still think this support is effective at getting the player to want to know more. In their B support is where a lot of things start to come together. Mordecai has learned what the words detest and ignorant mean, and he feels both confused at Stefan's hatred for his homeland and insulted at being called dumb. Stefan doesn't really address his feelings for Benyon directly, but does clarify that he didn't mean to insult Mordecai. Rather, he meant ignorance leads to him not knowing hate as others would. Before he leaves, he said that he's branded, and that if Mordecai can learn what that means, then it might explain both his feelings toward Benyon and why Laguz hate him. This is the earliest point in the game that the player could have even heard the word branded. The only other places where it's outright stated like this is in some of Soren's supports, which you can't get until much later. It's implied here though that those who are branded are mistreated by both Beork and Laguz. I really like how this game doesn't spoon feed you this stuff. It leads you on bit by bit and gradually reveals more of its own world. Bit of a side note, but isn't it crazy how any information regarding the branded are so hidden within Path of Radiance just for it to go on to be so important in Radiant Dawn? You can very easily play this entire game and never even learn who they are. Anyway, I'm pretty sure this A support is the longest individual conversation that Stefan has and is more dense in world building than some games' entire scripts. Mordecai has learned that to be a branded is to be the child of a Beork and Laguz. Stefan elaborates, saying that a mark on his forehead is proof of this, and says that Mordecai doesn't have to keep talking to him if it makes him uncomfortable. We learn from Mordecai that in Gallia, the branded are called parentless and considered bad omens. It's said that the birth of a parentless heralds a century of destruction. Stefan affirms that that's what the Laguz think of them. The branded's heritage is denied and they're treated as though they should have never been born. We also learn that while the Beork are still put off by them, they're much less hostile than the Laguz. Mordecai says that it doesn't even make sense for a branded to come into being, as the goddess Ashira was deliberate in making it impossible for Beork and Laguz to reproduce. Stefan reveals that actually both of his parents were Beork. It was an ancestor in the distant past who had relations with the Laguz, but the brand still shows in Stefan. As Stefan says, he bears no guilt but must still suffer the consequences. Stefan shares that he lives in an isolated community with other branded, showing that he isn't the only one. Mordecai asks why he wanted to know more about Gallia, and Stefan says that they had hoped that Crimea's and Gallia's friendly relationship represented an opportunity for the branded to come out of hiding and be accepted. These plans have, of course, been put on hold since the war began. Stefan again says that Mordecai is free to ignore his existence, but Mordecai refuses. He says that if Ashira's laws state that he must hate Stefan for being branded, then he will sooner disregard her. Stefan finds this amusing and says that his newfound friendship with Mordecai has given him a new perspective on the goddess. Mordecai asks him to clarify, which leads to the final line in the support and what I believe to be genuinely brilliant foreshadowing that radiates through the rest of Tellius' religious and political arc. If someone like you can be so sincere a friend, then perhaps she's not to blame. Perhaps her laws aren't what we think. I think it's amazing how much world building is contained in this one support. I think what would happen if Laguz and Beork tried to have a kid is a pretty natural question to come up for players, and here we finally learn not only what happens, but how various parts of the world react to it. Who the branded are, how they've come to be, how they're treated by Laguz, how that treatment differs from that of Beork, their historical basis for that treatment, and the response to it is all here. I wanted to give particular praise to the pros throughout this support. While he denies it, it's clear that Stefan thinks Mordecai is stupid and looks down on him, at least until their A support. This primarily manifests itself in Stefan never answering Mordecai's questions. Instead of just explaining why he dislikes Benyon or what a branded is, he tells him to find out for himself. In contrast, in their A support, he explains how his feelings towards Ashira have shifted instead of being vague like before. I think this shows some development from Stefan. By getting to know Mordecai, he's come to respect him, which is kind of a microcosm of Tellius' themes. Another thing I like about this support is the detail that the branded are called parentless in Gallia. I think this is reflective of other parts of Tellius. Within Dayan, they're not even taught the word Laguz, and instead just told to call them subhumans. In both cases, diminutive labels are forced onto a group they dislike, and this moniker becomes the common name for them. Laguz doing this to the branded as Dayan had done to Laguz shows how even those that are persecuted are capable of carrying out that same persecution against others. Stefan's relationship with his other support partner, Soren, reads differently, and the difference is instructive. Soren is one of the more complicated members within Ike's army, being privately burdened but outwardly pragmatic. Stefan treats him with a different tone because Soren has knowledge that Mordecai lacked. Their C support is incredibly mysterious to anyone not clued in on the backstory of these two characters. Stefan seems to know something about Soren, and this thing makes him an outsider. Whatever this thing may be, Stefan and Soren seem to have it in common, and he encourages Soren to speak with him sometime. Stefan is much more direct in their V support. He tells Soren that the branded have a colony in the Grand Desert where they live in peace. Soren pretends not to know what he's talking about, affirms that he does indeed belong in Ike's army, and leaves. Here we can see what I meant when I said he treats Soren differently from Mordecai. He's very direct in speaking to Soren and doesn't condescend as he had before. In their A support, Stefan again asks him what he'll do when he can't hide his heritage anymore, to which Soren again pretends not to know what he means. Stefan says that he'll age differently from the Beork due to his Laguz blood, and that eventually they'll catch on. Soren concedes that he has been aging differently, but remains resolute that he'll stay by Ike's side. Stefan tells him that when the time comes, he'll always be welcome at Grand Desert. In contrast to the Mordecai support, Stefan doesn't really undergo any development in his conversations with Soren. I think it's thematically fitting though that he doesn't grow as a person when he's interacting with someone who's also branded. A lot of the themes in the Tellius games revolve around breaking down barriers and understanding people with a different life experience from your own. So it makes sense that Stefan sees more character development when growing close to a Laguz compared to another branded. Path of Radiance handles character endings differently from most games in the series, with the character speaking with Ike before leaving being their ending rather than the where are they now screens that most of the games have done. Here, he just asked Ike to come chill with him sometime. Though, given everything we know about Stefan and his community, I think it's easy to read more into this. Maybe he sees in Ike a future for the branded to come out of hiding. Regardless, I like how his dialogue characterizes him as being pretty laid back. This stands in contrast to all the hardships he's endured, which I think makes for an interesting dynamic. In Radiant Dawn, Stefan returns very late in the game, being one of the last units you can recruit. He has the same insane recruitment conditions from FE9, which again reinforces the thematic throughline that Stefan is someone who exists at the margins of Tellius. There are 3 characters who can recruit him, and the one most people will see is with Micaiah. Here, he acknowledges her as branded and decides to fight alongside her since they're fighting against those who disturb the desert. I like how Stefan interacts with Micaiah compared to how he interacted with either Mordecai or Soren. He seems to be more at ease speaking with Micaiah because she's a branded, unlike Mordecai, and unashamed of that fact, unlike Soren. His dialogue with Soren could come off as confrontational, so that not being the case here implies that Stefan has a sense of mutual understanding with Micaiah. He doesn't have to test her like he did with his support partner. He can also be recruited by either Leth or Mordecai again. They're essentially the same conversation, with Stefan and the respective Laguz recognizing one another, Stefan being oblivious to the rapture and then deciding to join arms. I like that Stefan has this dialogue with Leth too instead of just the character he had to support with. I think it shows that, even if you didn't see it, they did grow close during the events of Path of Radiance. It makes the world feel alive since there's bonds being formed that you're not privy to. In the next chapter, there's a base conversation between Stefan and Yune, who's inhabiting Micaiah as a vessel. This conversation actually happens regardless of if Stefan was recruited. And one last time, because this character wasn't esoteric enough, this conversation differs depending on whether or not he was recruited. I'm being a bit dramatic. It's only the first few lines that change. When he's been recruited, Stefan is approached by Yune, while if not recruited, he approaches her. The conversation thereafter remains unchanged. The first half is mainly a recap of what we already know. He explains to Yune who the branded are and how they're treated within Tellius. Yune expresses confusion as to why they face such persecution. Stefan responds in kind, saying he would also like to know why. He tells her that a union between Beork and Laguz is considered a crime against the goddess. Yune says that she had never heard of such a thing. At this revelation, Stefan laughs. It was all a lie. Him and his people have been persecuted and forced into hiding for hundreds of years over a lie. The goddess's word had been distorted over time, and now the truth was finally revealed, and all Stefan can do is laugh at the absurdity of it all. I think this is a pretty natural reaction from Stefan. How else could he react? It's not like he can go back and tell everyone that the goddess never had an issue with the branded. That won't undo the centuries of suffering they've endured. And looking forward, who knows if this will even matter? Will the goddess's word even hold weight once this is all over? So much was lost for nothing. Again, what can he really do other than laugh at how ridiculous this is? In his Radiant Dawn ending, Stefan establishes a country with like-minded individuals. It's indicative of how much Tellius has changed after Radiant Dawn's events that a branded could become king. One of the most important bits of extra textual information is that Stefan is actually the direct descendant of Soren, one of Tellius' 3 heroes. This is confirmed only in the Path of Radiance art book. If you're only familiar with the English version, there's really no way to have predicted this. However, that's not the case in the Japanese version, where his name is actually Sonevalk. I really resent this change. I get wanting to replace a made-up name with a real one, and the translators for FE9 probably wouldn't have known that the etymology was important, but it sucks how this completely kneecaps a player's ability to figure out this piece of his character. You don't know who Soren is in FE9, but in FE10 when you first hear of him and learn that he was a lion, you could reasonably have expected the player to connect the two. It's unclear if Stefan is aware of this heritage, but I think him being descendant of one of the 3 heroes is still significant. Being Soren's descendant ties him directly to the origins of Tellius' history, yet his existence has been completely concealed. Stefan personally has to live with the consequences of Tellius' history being rewritten. Oh well, it's not like they're ever gonna walk back this change. I guess I'll just have to die mad about it. My favorite thing about Stefan as a character is how the writers utilize a limited economy of text to create a deep character who's thematically relevant while contributing immensely to the world building. Stefan's total number of lines is tiny compared to many characters, but those lines are dense. They imply centuries, social patterns, and future political change without long exposition dumps. As well, the restrictive recruitment conditions and the repeat motif of only being recognized by certain people mirror the character's status in the world. When game mechanics feel thematically congruent, the story is strengthened. When you take all of this together, Stefan feels like a masterclass in minimalist storytelling. He's a character who embodies the themes of Tellius through meaningful and smartly written dialogue. The way he's found, his interaction with others, his place in Tellius' history, it all reflects the marginalization that defines his life. For a character most people will never even meet, Stefan really is an embodiment of the Tellius duology. I'm tacking this on to the end because I didn't know where else to put it. Fire Emblem Wii is a cancelled Wii game that would have been a sequel to Radiant Dawn. We know very little about it other than it would have moved away from the typical SRPG combat. There are a few pieces of concept art, and some even show characters from FE9 and 10. So which characters are they? Ike, Micaiah, Elincia? No, you fool, it's Stefan and Ileana, of course. The idea of Stefan becoming a protagonist after being so well hidden in the first two Tellius games is so intriguing to me. To be fair, he did have blue hair in his Path of Radiance concept art, which is pretty in vogue for Fire Emblem lords. There are so many unanswered questions here. Would this game be about Stefan establishing his kingdom? Why was he hanging out with Ileana? Is she branded too? The Tellius games told so poorly that they nearly killed the series, so I guess we'll never go back to this. I'll just have to spend the rest of my life not knowing.